I think that part is the part that I struggle with the most because I would have never gotten a divorce under any circumstances. And I don't know if that's always the right thing,
Right.
and it's not that anything bad was going on. Nobody was cheating, nothing like, I was still not in the best place. And I was like, well, Lord, what do I do with that? And it was just like, nothing, you just wait. And I was like, okay. And he's like, let me get you together first. I was like, okay. So I actually never said anything to him. I became celibate, and I started telling my close friends and family. I was like, yeah, I was like, Devon's my husband, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, hey, you sound crazy. And I'm like, no, he isn't. Like, hey.
Hey guys, welcome to Little Blackbird. Another one is your favorite dating and relationship coach. Yeah, listen. Does God tell us who our partners are? Absolutely, He can do. If you believe that, if you deservedly submit your if you submit your requests and petitions onto Him, He's most certainly can tell you who they are. Do I disbelieve Meagan? Absolutely not. I believe her. I believe God told her. So how the hell did they get divorced? Right, this is part 2. We're talking about the God aspect. How the hell do we get told who our partner is? We marry who that person is and then get divorced. Right? How does that happen? Well, I'm here to break it down to you, because the reality of the situation is the reason why divorce actually takes place. There are many different instances, right? So when there's a split and a breakup, it's because something no longer works or no longer serves the people. And actually, we actually go through what I like to think that relationships go through what we call mini divorces, right? What I mean by that is divorcing from the previous idea or version of somebody. And it's actually one of the most scariest things for me personally, because as somebody who's got an attachment style called dismissive avoidant, I like consistency. I don't like things to keep on changing. But the reality of the situation is in relationships and in marriages, people change, right? And sometimes you may think for the better, or sometimes for the worse, whichever. But the change has happened, and it's about how we adapt and how we begin to maneuver that space where you change. There are career changes, there are body changes, there are job changes, there are faith changes, right? And I mean, people can increase in their faith, right? We're hoping no one's going to regress. There are different changes that can happen to people in that space. But before we even get to that point, I want to even say this, that relationships are a vehicle. And I've never had a car. I'll be honest with you, I don't drive, okay? But, I've seen my dad have a car, mum have a car. And a vehicle can last a very long time if it's well maintained. If you take care of it, the intimate little details, not just what's in the driving aspect of it, but the engine. If you take care of it, if you're cleaning things, if you're being diligent with the oil changes and the water changes, and you're making sure that you take it for MOTs and checks and making sure that actually you do what needs to be done to keep that car in good fashion, you can keep that car for a very long time. It's a bit like relationships. Many of us have been taught to look after the very big things, but the Bible says that God was not in the fire, nor the wind, not the earthquake, but He was in the small, still voice. And I think relationships are in the whispers, not in the loud sounds. The loud sounds come later on. And sometimes we hear the loud sound, it's a bit too late for the relationship, because actually we should have been listening to the whispers. What's that got to do with Meagan Good and Devon Franklin? Well, Meagan Good told us quite clearly a couple of years ago that the Lord told her that Devon Franklin was her husband. So how the hell can we fail a marriage and get to a place where we get to divorce? Someone might not call it a failure. That's fine as well. I accept that as well, right? We're not here to judge. We're just here to be able to understand and actually develop some ideas from this. How do we get to a place of being married? God told us, and get to a place of divorce. Did God just lie? God did not lie. But God will put it in your hands, just like in Matthew 25, the parable of the gifts. He will give you gifts and things in your hand and talents, and you have to be able to look after it. And the one thing I'm learning myself as a man is that the weight is really on my shoulders. Like, the weight's really on my shoulders to make sure that I'm not only speaking life into my partner, but I'm also being ready to adapt, because we're going to die at some point within the relationship. That version of me dies and a new one's born. And a new one's reborn, and another time a new one's reborn. Because as I gain more information or knowledge, as I get closer to Christ and get closer to Him, I learn that old things have to pass and new things have to come in. I spoke as a child at one point. There are immature parts of my life that now must begin to mature. So let's break down this video, because I want to be able to get deeper. Because Meagan Good really does speak eloquently about her experience on marriage and divorce, right? So she speaks about, even on Shannon Sharp, and talking about how greatest fear was obviously that, Devon would leave her in that place. And I think this is a really important part, because I'm going to hit it in a different way than I did in part 1. I want to be able to really break it down from a different perspective, just to make you understand why I believe this situation is important. All right. So before we do, make sure you guys like, share, subscribe, click on the bell button for notification of the uploads. We appreciate you guys who are around here. Okay. Again, it's your favorite dating and relationship coach. All right, let's get into this.
I was just like, why is this happening? My greatest fear was for my husband to leave me after 10 years of marriage, the way that my dad and my mom separated. And that's exactly what happened. And
Let's pause right there. She says that she's afraid that her partner, Devon Franklin at the time, would, was afraid that he would leave her just like her father left her mother. Do you know what that is? It's a pattern. Yeah. And whenever you start to see patterns, what is happening is that God is showing us that we need to break that pattern. Some call it generational curses. I call it generational patterns. And someone said it to me, Janelle, I had a conversation with Janelle last week, very powerful conversation between me and her. And we spoke about this generational patterns, but we spoke about, and she labeled it as the song. We follow the same song our parents had, and our children's children follow the same song that we had. And until we recognize there are missing gaps in the song, we don't change the song. We just keep singing the same song. And it made so much sense for me because we actually do this quite a lot. It's biblically speaking, right? Genesis 24, if you read that, it's a story of Isaac before he met Rebekah, right? Abraham sends his servant and go and get a wife for Isaac. The servant goes and then prays to the Lord and says, Lord, whoever, helps feed my camels, that's the person that needs to be the partner for Isaac. So God right there didn't necessarily point out Rebekah, but he pointed out Rebekah through a sign, right? Like he didn't necessarily say directly, it's Rebekah, but he pointed it out through the prayer of the individual saying, is this a sign? Then he released it to him. He realizes it's Rebekah. They live happy ever after. Now, that's to say that God does answer those prayers about who is your actual partner. Now, the second thing is this, though. How are we going to maintain that gift that God has given us? How are we going to maintain the marriage, the vehicle that we have? And then within that, we have to understand that we have patterns. Let me give you some of them. Abraham, Isaac. Do you know they both lied? Did you know that both Abraham and Isaac told a lie? Now, someone might say a half lie. It don't matter. Abraham lied. Okay? He lied to King Abimelech. And guess who Isaac lied to? King Abimelech. And guess who Isaac had as sons? Jacob. Guess what Jacob was? A trickster. Do you know what Sarah did? She manipulated the situation so that she would get a child before Hagar came. Do you know what Rebecca did? She manipulated too to get Jacob to get the blessings instead of Esau. Pattern. If we don't look at patterns of our past, we will continue those patterns in the present and in the future. And so when I heard her say that she was afraid of Devon leaving her like her father left her mother, I knew that pattern. Now, the question is, what did you do in order to make sure you don't go the same way? There's a Bible scripture, Joshua 3, and something that the Lord has been really working with me, and it's been intense. I hate it. I can't lie to you. I don't like it, but I know that I need it. So wherever he tells me to go, I'm gonna go. What do I mean by this? Joshua 3, he is the servant of Moses. He was one of the two spies that came back with a good report.
And it's just like, I don't understand this. And so
Hold on, sorry.
It was a lot of prayer, a lot of evaluation.
Pause there. He came back with a very good report saying him and Joshua and Nun and Caleb as well, came back with a good report saying that we can take the land, the promised land of Canaan. All right. Joshua then becomes a servant of Moses. He climbs on mountain high. God then calls Joshua and says, Joshua, you're my next person. Moses out of the way. Okay. But in the Joshua story, they go a completely different way. Moses took Israel through the Red Sea, right, from Egypt. But God says, I'm taking you a different way, Joshua. I want you to go through the Jordan. Now, if you've ever read the Bible, read the New Testament, the Jordan's always mentioned. The Red Sea doesn't get mentioned as much. The Jordan gets mentioned quite a bit. Where did Jesus get baptized? In the Jordan. Where did the Lord say, this is my good and favorite servant? It was in the Jordan area, right? And you start realizing a lot of things happen in the Jordan. There's something about that Jordan, okay? Now, why am I mentioning this story? Because Joshua had a different pattern, right? Moses had the people, and his anger caused him to strike the rock, not speak to it. Joshua had to do a different way, and so God took him through the Jordan, and they had to fight to win the territory of Canaan that was promised onto the people, the promised land of milk and honey. Okay, so what I mean by this is that there are patterns that happen in relationships that God is looking at us to begin to pray about and also to act upon. This is why people in the world also have successful relationships, because the principles are the same. Whether you have God or not, God's principles are still the same. Break bad habits and patterns. You need to. Don't continue it onwards, right? If you see something that's not working, we need to change it. So the question I asked myself was, I wonder what conversations and work Meagan may have done around her area of fear that Devon would leave her like her dad left her mother. And if nothing's really been worked on, and all we're focusing on is being celibate, waiting, not drinking, not smoking, those are great things. But actually, to maintain the relationship, not to attain, because attaining it is actually kind of easy. The maintenance of that relationship requires us to consistently look at the information that's coming our way. Whispers, not loud sounds, because the loud sounds whispers become loud sounds, just like the serpent becomes the dragon in the end in Revelation. It's a gradual progression of growth. And so I started looking at it again, and I said, both Meagan and Devon have an issue here, right? That maybe might have caused the reason to break down. I did that in part 1, but I'm again just highlighting this aspect of you can pray all you want, but there needs to be action behind it. We can pray all we want, but we need to hear what God is actually saying. Are we open to what God's direction is? Are we open to the new way? Something that's been happening to me the last few months. I was saying to God, look, I want to become a better man. I want to grow into a man that somebody could marry. And actually, I would break some of the patterns that I saw from my father. Because when I first came to Christ, I told him, I ain't going to be like my dad. Not that he's bad, but because I see there are deficiencies that need to be worked out. And if I don't work it out, I will do the same mistakes he made. Then I've not grown, I've not learned, and I've not got better. I'm only repeating the same path that he took. So I said, God, I need to do that here. Sometimes you forget what you say, and then God is like, okay, don't worry, I got you. So now I'm in a season when I came back from Egypt. I spent some time in Egypt. That's spiritual, that means, not literally Egypt. It means I was fornicating. I'm just going to be honest with you. For 3 years, I was out of it. I was broken. I was hurt. I was emotionally devoid. I didn't want to emotionally attach myself. I didn't want to grow. I didn't want to learn, okay? Now, something that happened when I came out of Egypt, all right? And I said to God, listen, what do you want me to do? Do you know what? And God is like, don't worry. I'm going to take you on a new route. See, the other way you went before the first time round, I hear it, but I'm going to take you on a new route. And I'm going to change you. And I'm going to refurbish you. I'm going to transform you. Now, there was a death that happened. A death. The old me had to die. Even though I'm a Christian, born again, the old me had to die. And so that old me has to be put aside. Now, I'm not going to say I'm perfect. I'm not even near there. Not even close. In fact, I realize just how insufficient I really am. And I realize how much I must lean upon the Lord in order to make it work for my life. Here's something I learned about my relationship with self. I realized I don't speak up. I realize I don't advocate for myself. I realize I don't tell people when certain things hurt me. I realize I have delayed reactions. I realize I don't like being vulnerable. I realize that I have silent anger issues. If you watch my channel, you know I talk about this a lot. Silent anger means coming from a place of disappointment and hurt that past people have inflicted upon you, i.e. parents that have let you down emotionally in some shape or form. And then when you get into relationships, people's disappointment and letting you down turns to anger, frustration, okay? And that can ruin relationships. Same way Moses hitting a rock when you're supposed to speak to it. Instead of you having a conversation with your partner, now you're screaming and shouting at them. Same principle. Do you see how it is? We look at Moses and go, I wouldn't have hit the rock, or Moses is so angry, he hit the rock. What? No. God is telling you, you should be speaking to your partner, yet you're cussing them out. Or yet you're saying something in a very harsh tone. Here's what I also learned. I need to shut up and learn when you're talking to me. It may be painful and I may be defensive, and I really am defensive. I struggle with criticism. As a dismissive, avoidant person, criticism hurts much more harder. It hits home harder. But here's what I learned. I don't want silent whispers become loud sounds. I learned that from Elijah. I realized that God speaks in the silent whisper, and women speak in a silent whisper, and men speak in a silent whisper. So when people are saying things silently, don't ignore it. This is the time to address and be like, actually, look, this is a problem. Okay, cool. How do we start looking at solutions? It may not be solved today, but maybe tomorrow. Why am I doing this? Because I realize the vehicle needs continual maintenance as I go along. I can't service it every year and then be like not maintaining it throughout the year. Because by the time I get to the end of the year, the vehicle's actually getting damaged. So there are things that are being done in the course of relationship that I need to begin to break. I realize I have my own patterns. I realize the same way that I felt like my dad wasn't necessarily as available emotionally, I realized I showed up in the same way in relationships. Okay, what do I need to start doing? I need to start looking at that. Let me tell you this now. This was not only my own wisdom. This was God highlighting these things. And because I'm open to it now, I wasn't open to it before. I can tell you this for sure. I told God, I don't want to hear it, blood. I don't want to hear it. But I realize now I need to be open to it. It doesn't matter how much I coach people, and it does not matter how much I teach people. And by the way, you should really reach out to me, because listen, I'm coaching, and we love to help transform, grow, and heal people as well. Okay. Now you're probably asking me the question: how can you coach when you haven't overcome all you've overcome? Has anybody overcome everything? No, we are human beings and we're still growing and still being better. But I promise you I can help in these areas because we're going to journey together. Okay. So in reality, I realized there's so much things I need to work on. And when I watched the Meagan and Devon and I went back to research, I realized, hold on a minute now, I'm going to show you something. Okay. Because Megan's not the only problem. I got to show you something so that you understand something. Just listen to this by Devon Franklin.
Patient, just long suffering. It was the type of thing that helped me really understand that, wow, love is one, it is unconditional. And two, I have somebody who would love me like that. And then what that did was all of the rage that was happening in me, you know, it just started to calm.
Right.
Yeah.
So listen, he had rage. Now somebody's thinking to myself, what kind of rage do you mean? Rage of disappointment and hurt, fear of abandonment. See, a lot of men, and he speaks about this actually, a lot of men cover up their actual emotions through their rage. What does that mean? When you peel back the onion layers of your actual emotions and you go back to the depth of where it starts from, a lot of men will realize that a lot of their feelings are actually fear. It's not anger, it is the top part of it, but it's actually fear. What do I mean by this? When they go back and you realize, you'll probably feel as you probably feel inferior. You probably feel like you're inadequate. You might feel embarrassed. You might feel shamed. You might feel disgusted, right? Disgust is actually an emotion. You might feel these feelings, right, underneath the surface. You might even feel sad. You might feel abandoned, isolated. And he said these words. He felt isolated. After the passing of his father, he felt isolated. Okay, so what does that mean? It means there are other feelings that were actually at the bottom, but because men, way that we socialize and interact with the world, specifically men, I'm talking about right now, right? The way we interact with the world and the way we show up, we will label it as rage. But really and truly, it's because we're not trying to be vulnerable and actually dive deeper into what we're actually feeling and recognize before it got to rage, there was fear, there was disgust, and there was sadness. Those three components actually were working. The sadness is abandonment and isolation and loneliness. The fear is that feeling of not being inadequate, not being feeling a worthlessness, feeling like you're inferior. You have these kind of feelings, and they may not come into the surface straight away, right? But they're working underneath the surface, bubbling. And then we get to a place where I like to call it revolt. You revolt, and that is disgust leading into anger, and then we start to be critical and skeptical of people, right? Because we don't have trust. And so what we don't realize is these things begin to play into the relationship, and there are patterns. Because remember, Devon Franklin's father also divorced his mum. There are patterns. And if you don't start to notice the patterns, you are going to repeat the same thing that your parents did. And so one of the things I'm really praying about, and I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I'm far from it. And I'm cautious of it. And I don't want to say I'm scared of it, but my eyes are open wide to say, God, I really need your help. And I'll even pray about it even after this, because I'm feeling it even more. I want to pray some more. It's really about, what patterns am I carrying that are destructive to me and to my relationship? What's going to be destructive to my thing? Like, I remember as a kid, I remember going to my dad, and maybe he's working, and I'll be like, Dad, whatever. And I realized after a while, because he was not involved in a conversation, I just stopped going to him. Now, what does that do? It creates distance. And what does that mean? It means that now when I have children, I got to be aware. I don't want to be too much, but I got to find a balance. How do I be attentive to my children? Maybe I can say to you, come back to me in half an hour. I'm just doing some work. Come back in half an hour. I set myself aside and say, let's talk. Right? Rather than saying, right now, let's talk. Maybe I can't talk right now. Maybe I've got some work I've got to do. And that's fine. I say, hey, come back to me in an hour. Set the expectation for the child. I've got to lead, and I've got to do things differently. That's not just me and my partner. It means, how do I handle my partner? Right? I know I've got my own issues. Like when I'm triggered, negro. Grace, what is that? What's grace? I don't even know what that is. Yeah? When people trigger me and they hurt me, my first narrative in my mind is, you do it on purpose. You're trying to hurt me because of what I've experienced. And then what ends up happening is, if I don't check that feeling, I'm going to give you a scripture. 2 Samuel. Verse 11, chapter 11, David and Bathsheba. It says, in the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. But David remained at Jerusalem. Sometimes, right, because we don't learn these things, we are going to be resting when we should be at war. Now, here's what I mean by that, at war. I need to be at war with myself. I need to know that God is telling me there is parts of you that need to die off again. Galatians 5, and that I should nail some of these things to the cross and say, God, okay, that needs to change. If I don't begin to assess the patterns that are happening, I'm going to repeat past failures. And because both Devon Franklin and Meagan Good both suffered in the area of divorce, their parents, they were now faced with the task of being a generational breaker. They had to break what their parents could not do. I gave you the example of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob following a lineage of the same kind of behaviors. Okay, Jacob ended up having Rachel and Leah. And do you know Rachel also lied to her father? She took not even that. Both Leah and Rachel are con men. Let me tell you this now. And I say con men like loosely. All right. What I mean by that is Leah, being the older sister, knew that Jacob loved Rachel because he was working for her and he kissed her when he met her. So why is it that Leah decided to agree to her father's commands and go and sleep with Jacob on their wedding day, knowing it was meant for her sister? Why would you do that? Right? Why would you agree to do that? And then Rachel too, at the end when they were leaving, decided to take the gods of her father, idols, and lie and sit on it and lie to her father that she didn't take them when she did. Right? So in a sense, the pattern just keeps getting repeated. Do you see what I'm saying to you? So what do I realize? I realize this. I can only fight for me. I can only work on me. But I need to make sure that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do through prayer, spiritually, and then I better do what I do emotionally, physically, mentally, and psychologically to make sure that I'm not repeating the same patterns, right? And you can only ask of your partner to be the same way. But the fact is, Devon actually divorced her. She didn't want to get divorced. So unfortunately now, he's divorced her the same way that his parents are divorced, her parents divorced. Why? Because a pattern wasn't dealt with. And what conversations were actually being had, we don't really know. Right? Now, they may have been dealing with it, I don't know. But reality is, when you see divorce, your stamina for something to not get divorced can also be affected, right? Like, you both saw your parents split up. So, in reality, you may say to yourself, I'll never want to get divorced. And you mean it. But reality is, what's working beneath that, even though you're intentional, is that you're not what you want. You don't want to be divorced. What the schematics and the script that's writing and running behind in the subconsciousness hasn't been dealt with, you'll do it again. Chris Brown I think he saw his mother being abused, right? Ended up abusing Rihanna. I don't care what no one says. He did, okay? We can forgive him, but he did what he did. You know what I'm saying to you? He did the exact same thing his parent happened to his mum. So in a sense, he repeated the same pattern. Why? Because he never dealt with what the pattern was. What was the pattern? Well, the anger, right? The triggering. Now, you know what I'm saying to you? Like, so it's like, if you don't figure out that pattern, or you don't see it and you don't observe it and you don't say, actually, I need to change it, you're going to do the same thing. I realize now, when God was telling me in the beginning of the year, your anger, I was like, anger what? I don't do angry. But the silent anger that I have, the way that I implode, the way that I can go isolated, the way that I can stop co-regulating with my partner, this can cause carnage in a relationship. And there's certain damages that are very difficult to ever come back from. There are certain things you just cannot say ever, because you may not ever come back from it. So you have to be careful, and you have to be so diligent in the way that you handle this affair, because it's a delicate yet simultaneously such a beautiful vehicle called marriage. And I'm realizing that. So I'm realizing that there's a weight behind this. If I got married at 25, 26, I would have been divorced. Because the things that I knew then, I don't know now. The things that I needed to grow up. I needed to learn that there are certain behaviors that just don't make a relationship healthy. And many of us have very unhealthy patterns that we watch in relationships. If you are watching this, I want you to understand, take stock. What patterns do I have from my parents and parents' parents that I'm still replicating now? Sit down with yourself and really start analyzing. Are my relationships going the exact same way that I see my parents go? Right? If it is, I need to start looking at it. I was being led by my lust in my past. I was being led by my eyes in my past. You know what I'm saying? I was putting myself in a situation I didn't need to be in. So we need to do what Joshua 3 is. We need to wait for God to go ahead of us and go a brand new way. Okay, we need to wait for God to go ahead of us in a brand new way. So when you're looking at Meagan Good, yes, God did tell her who her husband was. Absolutely. But what did both Devon and Meagan actually do as changing the pattern to what they saw with their parents? Okay, prayer without works is dead. Prayer should naturally lead us to actions. Right? Because a lot of our issues in relationships are, how do we just deal with a trigger? Okay, but you know, Meagan told us, God told her to be celibate. God told her who to marry. God told her, she said that she tried everything to make it work in her marriage, right? And she didn't do everything perfect, but she tried everything she could. So what happened? Simply put, sometimes a pattern will outbeat us, because until we learn how to change the pattern, right? Until we learn how to add new information and new inputs, we're doomed to repeat the same mistakes. So if you know your relationships are mirroring what you see with your parents, and people around you, then it means there's a pattern that you're existing on. Time to look at the pattern and time to change the inputs that are coming in. You need a new way of looking at things. Make sure you guys like, share, subscribe, click on the bell button for notification uploads. We appreciate you guys.